So let me talk to you about post-SSRI sexual dysfunction. And the slides are not moving forward at this end at the moment. Right, there we go. Right. And now, can I minimize the box over here on the right? There we go. Right. Okay. So one of the two people you see here is not able to make love because they're on an antidepressant. We don't know which of the two. When you actually have a problem on an SSRI antidepressant, it's one of those problems that you aren't the only person that has it. The person you sleep with, the person who's your partner, may also have a problem because they aren't able to make love if you aren't able to make love. It's a bit like SSRIs and homicide, where a person who isn't on the pill may end up dead as a result of the pill. Now, I said one of these people isn't able to make love because they're on an antidepressant, but it could also be isn't able to make love because they were on an antidepressant. Within 30 minutes of the first SSRI pill you take, your genitals become numb, orgasms become mute, and over time while you're on the pills, your interest, your desire to make love drops off. This is the kind of thing that if you're told anything or if you read about it, you'll hear that, well, yes, this will all clear up when you halt the pills. But we've known for 40 years or more that actually, no, this doesn't always happen, that there are people, when they halt the pills, the problem becomes much, much worse. They become even more gently numb and um, emotionally numb as well. Their orgasms disappear completely. And their interest in making love drops off totally. This is a problem called post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, PSSD. It happens to women and men, it happens to old people and young people, cis and trans, every ethnic group on earth. We don't know how or why it happens, and we don't have any cures. It may recover after a few years, or it may last forever. Now, given that we've known about this for so long, the question is, when we're put on one of these drugs, why is no one told that this can happen? Why, when we take the problem to our doctor to talk about it, do we often get laughed at? And I mean it, we often get laughed at, and people even get locked up for their crazy ideas. When we bring the problem to the doctor, why aren't they listening to us and looking at us and agreeing, yes, it seems obvious that this pill has caused the problem? Who are they listening to? Who are they looking at? Are they not able to recognize when a drug causes a problem anymore? Is it not part of their training? Or do they need to seek permission from someone in order to agree with us that the drug has caused a problem? And if so, who do they need to seek permission from? This problem about antidepressants and sex goes back to the late 1950s, early 1960s, when some of the older drugs we had, like amitriptyline, which were, as a group, much more powerful than the SSRIs, came out. They treated a condition called melancholia, which is severe depressive disorder, unlike the SSRIs, which only treat mild depressive problems. But even though melancholia, which in its own right causes a loss of libido, doctors were able to distinguish the problems being caused by their pills back then from the problems being caused by the illness. But on an SSRI, where you have no loss of libido from the conditions they're given for, doctors these days will say to you, well, actually, it's your illness that's causing the problem, not the pills. We knew in the early 1970s, when we gave some of these older drugs, that in a tenth of the dose used to treat people who were depressed, they could make genitals numb to the point where it could be used usefully to treat men who had a premature ejaculation problem. We knew in the early 1980s that some people, when they halted these drugs, went on to have an enduring sexual uh, uh, um, dysfunction that could last for ages. In the mid-1980s, when companies were doing healthy volunteer trials of the SSRIs that later came on the market, what they found was many of the healthy volunteers, young, healthy men who had no problems at all, complained bitterly about the sexual problems they had on these drugs. And in some cases, it looks like the problems went on after the 2 or 3 week period been on these drugs came to an end. But doctors like me running clinical trials for the pharmaceutical companies in people who are depressed and anxious weren't told about this. What we were told was, don't ask about sex. And when we didn't ask about sex, it meant that the companies ended up being able to claim that their clinical trials showed that less than 5% of people had any problems making love while they were on their drug. And the hint was that once you halt the drugs, if you're going away for the weekend or whatever, everything will be just fine. By the early 1990s, when the SSRIs were on the market, companies had begun to get a flood of reports to them about people who had enduring sexual dysfunction after they halted the treatment. But we weren't told about this. Part of the reason we didn't get to hear about it, perhaps, was that people who have PSSD are the same kind of problems caused on other drugs aren't inclined to let anyone else know that this is what they have. It's the kind of thing you want to keep to yourself. So for more than 30 years, people kept quiet about it. They didn't link their name to it. They didn't say, I have PSSD. But in the last few years, groups like PSSD Network have changed all that. They've said, look, we've got to come out and tell people we have this problem and ask them, why are you not doing research on how it happens and how to put it right? And actions like this have made a big difference. It's getting harder and harder for the media, the politicians, and others to ignore problems like this. And I want to recommend something the PSSD network have been doing. They produced a series of podcasts recently, and here's one of the podcasts which features three ordinary guys analyzing what's gone wrong with them, but at the same time telling us something extraordinary about what's gone wrong in healthcare generally. They've put their finger on what's going wrong for all of us in a way that very few other people have done. And here's some quotes from the podcast. It's a podcast that I recommend you all tune into. One of the three, as you saw, was called Bryn, and he's saying, getting PSSD undermines your faith in the medical establishment and the whole system of science as we have it. The fact that none of these professionals understand this condition or know anything about it when we know we have it. It's not some vague feeling. Losing your libido is equivalent to going blind or deaf. It's that level of sensory impairment. And Roy chips in and says, it isn't just genital numbness, you become emotionally numb as well. So he says the same can be said for losing your emotions. I felt I lost not just one, but two senses, my sexuality and my emotions. And Brennan comes back and says, look, if we want to be believed, we have to remember just how incredible our story sounds. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around. My dad says it's not possible a drug could cause these effects. It wouldn't be on the market if it did. Now, let me pick up that last point. Well, no, actually, I'm going to pick it up after the next slide. If you've got PSSD or any problem on any drug these days, increasingly you're up against, you're going to have a Tiananmen Square moment, and if your doctor agrees with you about that you're right about what's wrong, you're both going to have a moment like this, which is you're up against a ghost-written medical literature. The literature reporting on the clinical trials of these drugs is ghost-written. It's not written by the people whose names are on the authorship line. And it's increasingly fraudulent. You're up against regulators who don't have the clinical trial data, who may have been told by the pharmaceutical company, look, in this trial, our drug didn't work and wasn't safe, even though there's an article out there in some of the very best journals saying that in this trial, the drug worked wonderfully well and was safe. The regulators don't say anything about this, even though they know that the literature is essentially fraudulent. Up to half of the trials of antidepressants were negative trials, and many of them are published as positive. Even if the regulator did come out and talk about the problem, one of the issues regulators have is they don't know how to analyze when a drug's causing a problem or not. They're not doctors, they're bureaucrats. So let me take you to this. This is NHS Digital. Let's say you're prescribed an SSRI by your doctor, and you might go in the UK, if you're in the UK, you might go to NHS Digital. We're taking the same approach that MHRA take, and EMA in Europe, and FDA in the United States. NHS Digital will tell you about some of the common effects these drugs have. They can cause nausea, headaches, you may feel a bit nervous, etc., etc. When you ask them why they picked out these side effects to let you know about, they say, well, we picked out the ones that are most common. But the most common side effects are the sexual side effects, which happen in close to 100% of people that go on these drugs. So if you ask them, why do you not include the sexual side effects? The answer, and I have it in print, is we don't want to deter people from taking their drugs. Now, this essentially means that NHS Digital and MHRA and EMA and FDA are all in the business of getting you and me to live the life that companies want us to live, rather than trying to engineer the situation so that these drugs, if we choose to use them, are going to help us to live the life that we want to live. Further on, deeper into this, if you can find that NHS Digital do mention that, if you're a man and you go on these drugs, they may possibly reduce sperm quality. Well, the facts of the matter are, if you go on these drugs, your sperm count will plummet. There's almost nothing else that will reduce your sperm count in the way as much as SSRIs will do. If you're a woman, you're not really told anything in particular here. What they certainly don't tell you is that these drugs double the rate of miscarriages, double the rate of terminations of pregnancy, possibly because they disinhibit you, and double the rate of birth defects. You're not told this. So where does that leave us? Well, 4.5 years ago, the BMJ produced this feature article, which said that in Britain, we're not making love the way we used to do. And this is going to be the same for the United States and Canada and all of the Western world. It's not just the UK, where 15% or more of us are on these drugs, which of course means, if you take into account that it's not just the person on the drug that's having a problem, it's the person that they live with, it will also be having a problem. It may mean that 20 or 30% of us are not making love. The BMJ article tells you it's depression that's causing the problem. It's not depression that's causing the problem. Most people getting put on these drugs have no problem making love before they go on the drugs. But the BMJ article doesn't mention that, because BMJ's lawyers would not let the article be published if it did mention it. So, a month or two ago in the UK, these figures came out which said that the fertility rate in the UK is 1.56 births per woman. The replacement rate is 2.0. And when the replacement rate in European and other countries fell below 2.0 first, there was panic. We're not replacing ourselves. What's going on here? Now, part of the problem is an aging population. The more people who are old there, the more likely the figures are to fall. But I think it's unquestionable, with 30% of people in the UK not able to make love the way they would wish to, that the drugs are also playing a part here. The Canadian rate is even lower than this. But I want to make one or two more points quickly before I end. One is, I'm Irish. I'm an immigrant to the UK, and like millions of Irish people, my view is that we have made the UK a much better place than it would have been without us. So I am pro-immigration. And I want to let you know that of this 1.56 births per woman in the UK, 30% of the births in 2020 in the UK were to women born outside the UK. And 66% of the births in London were to a parent who was born outside the UK. So if you stripped those births out, and one of the points to make is that immigrant populations are much less likely to be taking SSRIs than the native population are. So if you take those births out of the frame, the reproduction rate in the native population is probably closer to 1.0, which is catastrophic, or would be catastrophic, except we're being helped by immigrants coming into the country, but also every country in the Western world is probably affected similarly. The UK is not going to stand out because everywhere in the Western world is facing much the same problem. Now, the problem, medicines are chemicals combined with information. Chemicals are tricky. It's important that we do research on it, and research that I'm involved in show that the way these chemicals are causing this problem may ultimately lead us, if we can work out what's going on, to better anti-cancer drugs and antivirals. So we need research to happen in this area. It should be good for the pharmaceutical companies, it should be good for us, but it's not going to happen while companies deny there's a problem. The problem here isn't the chemicals. All chemicals are risky. The problem is the information that goes with these chemicals that should help us to keep things as safe as they can be. The information is increasingly fraudulent. It's not telling us the kind of things that either we or our doctors need to know in order to help us live the lives that we want to live. It's designed to help companies get us to live the life that they want us to live. It's about assays rather than clinical trials, assays to get the drug on the market and to increase market share, rather than clinical trials to inform clinical practice and keep us as safe as possible. This doesn't just apply to the antidepressants, and it's not just about PSSD. It's a problem that increasingly applies to all drugs that we might take and all other problems that we might have on these drugs. And it's why your doctor hasn't heard about the problem that you bring to them. The SSRIs in particular, though, don't just cause a problem to the person that you live with who isn't on the pills. They are changing the way the Western world looks. They're affecting everyone that lives in the Western world. Thank you.
Hello! If you find something of significant value in our World Council for Health videos and live General Assembly meetings, please consider supporting us as a regular donor from as little as $1 a month or making a one-off donation. Thank you.